Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Gaining Actionable Insights with Effective Surveys Backed by Cognitive Psychology, a webinar brought to you by the IMCA. We are joined today by a couple of our guests from AnalyticsIQ, and I'm going to introduce them in just a moment, but I've got a couple of announcements that I'd like to go through before we get into the content for today. First thing is, reminder about the 2021 annual conference and showcase gala. Coming up is scheduled in Orlando, Florida for June 21st through the 23rd. Great event. If you've never been to an IMCA conference, it is indeed a treat. The ability to interact with peers as well as some great learning opportunities. And on the final night, the gala, which consists of the awards. If you'll slip to the next slide, I'll get to the awards in just a second, but I want to also talk about next month, March 25th, we have Christine Thierry, who is going to be doing an outstanding session, Brand You, Building Your Personal Leadership Brand. Really going to be some good stuff. I've worked with Christine before. I've seen her present, and she has a great way of really putting things in a perspective that is very, very helpful. And personal brand is a big thing. Couldn't be more important than ever now, given that most of what we see of one another from a brand's perspective is right here in a Zoom room. So that this is a good time. So I encourage you to put that on your calendar for March 25th. Registration will be open as soon as we finish up the webinar today. And the Showcase Gala, I mentioned earlier, exciting opportunity here. This is the longest standing and largest industry, completely insurance industry focused awards. So please get out there, get your awards together, and get your submissions ready to go. Still, for you overachievers, the early bird discount is still out there until March the 1st. So that is going to go away pretty quickly. So it's time to look at and download the forms and get ready to get moving on that. All right, but having said that, without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers. So Ariana Prochak and Dr. Sarah Cavrak will dive into how best utilize surveys and survey data in order to gain insights needed to enhance your marketing efforts. Ariana will discuss why surveys are important and the wide range of surveys that exist. And then Dr. Cavrak will speak to the field of cognitive science and how that informs the development of survey research. A real treat today that we have these insights with us. She'll share how the creation and administration of surveys offers valuable insights for your business. She'll highlight pitfalls and missteps that you may run into along the way, and she'll provide some examples and use cases of how their survey data is leveraged to understand consumers on a deeper level. Real treat. And with that said, please, Ariana, take us away.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jim. Hi, everybody. Ariana Prochak. I'm with AnalyticsIQ and a member of the IMCA. Super excited to be here today and talking about such an interesting subject, very near and dear to my heart. As Jim mentioned, we'll be talking about why surveys are important, what types of surveys exist, the approach to surveys and survey research and some real life use cases and our personal use of cognitive psychology. And so just kind of diving in here before we really start to dig into the what's and the whys and the hows, I'd love to just get some understanding, especially of a couple of poll questions that we'd like to launch and just understand kind of how the audience here has used surveys, if you've used surveys, and what that looks like. So first question, have you ever leveraged surveying as a means to gain specific insights in your customers, either directly or through a partner? Give everybody a couple of seconds. And then if we want to go to the second question or look at the results of that first one. Great. Okay. So we have a lot of people that have used surveys. Awesome. That makes me really happy, about 92%. So that's really good. So, this first part of the presentation is really going to be talking through survey options, whys, pitfalls, things like that. But then the second question here, I'll go ahead and launch that. Do you leverage external data sources to gain insights into your customers in order to optimize marketing communications? Just, are you doing that today? Are you using it to bolster your marketing strategies? Okay. Ooh, we got about almost a 50-50 split here. Yes and no. About 54% say no. So interesting. Okay, so we've got a lot of people who have used surveys, but not a lot of people who are using kind of external resources. So I think this will be really interesting and it's going to be really helpful in talking through surveys and how surveys can be utilized both internally and externally at your organizations, what options exist out there and how to get through them. So kind of just, jumping off, as we're talking about surveys and really gaining insights into our customers, whether it's on the B2B space or the B2C space, there are really some key things that you want to understand to determine if you actually need a survey, right? Surveys can be pretty intensive. They can be time consuming, they can be expensive. And, if you're talking about doing it to your own customers, you want to make sure that you're not fatiguing them with too many questions or too many surveys, too many communications, right? So the first question to always ask yourself is, what exactly are you trying to understand, right? Is it information that already exists? Is it, just really high level, or trying to get an in-depth insight into a very specific topic? What is that piece of information that's absolutely necessary for you to have a survey? What is it that you're trying to learn about, right? What is that topic? There's all sorts of different ways to approach a survey, and there's all different types of surveys, right? Is it a brand health survey? Is it a market insight survey? What is it that you're trying to learn about, and who are you trying to learn about? So again, going back to customers or marketplace analyses, you want to know who that target market is, because that's going to determine how you approach the survey itself. Question 3 here is, how do you intend to use the results, right? Once you have all these great insights, you've done the survey, then what? So you want to make sure that the results and the way that you're forming the survey are actually going to be actionable at the end of the day, and not just something to say, hey, that was really cool, what a pretty picture, right? So it has to be actionable, and you want to understand how you intend on using the results. You want to know what your budget is for the survey as well. So depending on kind of those first couple of questions, what do you want to understand? Who are you trying to learn about? What are you learning about, and how you're using the results? That'll kind of guide a little bit on the budget for the project. At the end of the day, surveys can get a little bit expensive depending on what type of survey you're using and how you're using the data at the end. So you want to know kind of what that budget process is, because, if you're talking about just going out and doing a survey monkey survey of your current customers, that's not super intensive and super expensive. But when we start getting deeper into the type of analyses that are being done, the work that's being done, general market surveys, those can be a bit pricey, and you just want to be cognizant of what your expectations are coinciding with your budget. And then last but not least, how will these insights fit into your overall marketing strategy? So this is kind of similar to that actionability, right? So you want to make sure that there is kind of that full circle understanding of what the insights you're going to gain from this, the results you're going to get from this, are going to drive your strategy to drive growth in your organizations. So some things to kind of consider. Now you've asked yourself these questions, you understand where this fits in. Now what, right? So the first thing is, before you actually put the survey together and launch the survey, it's understanding what data you already have. In the data industry and in the survey industry, we have this wonderful challenge of having too much data and not enough data, right? So in your organization, you're probably going to have all sorts of really great information on your first party insights, first party intelligence. Before launching a survey, go there, look at what you have today, determine, is there information in here that's going to answer this question? Especially if it's information on your own customers, you want to make sure, like, does this already exist? Or do I really need to ask these questions? Simultaneously, very specific options you might not have enough data, right? That it might not exist. And that's where you may want to go do a survey. But before even doing a survey, you really want to evaluate second and third party partners or potential partners to see what's out there. There are so many different types of data, so many different types of partners and companies that you can utilize data from that already exists today. So, evaluating what that marketplace looks like to answer the questions that you have, that can save a lot of time and a lot of money to get those answers for you before going, full custom survey and putting that budget there. So something definitely to consider is making sure you have what exactly you need in terms of the data and the insights before going into a survey. Second piece is you really want to start, demographics and firmographics are super important. It's a key indicator on who your customers are. But moving beyond that, right? You don't want to launch a survey that's just based on demographic or firmographic insights, because back to point one, that exists. You need to identify what behaviors, motivations, insights that you need that are really going to make the survey effective and necessary. So really, understanding how you move beyond just that kind of basic data to answer those questions. You really want to be utilizing surveys to create an intimate insight into your customers' behaviors. There's so much information that's out there that's pretty basic. You really want to utilize this opportunity to connect directly with people. Whether you're asking them firmographic pieces of information, your clients are on the business side of things, or if you are a consumer-driven company, you want to make sure that you're understanding exactly what it is that you are trying to solve for, and you're not just asking questions that are pretty basic. So this is your opportunity to really get to know customers on a very intimate level. And last but not least, answering pressing questions around their engagement, their motivations, your brand health, guest satisfaction. These are all pieces of information that probably don't exist, and even things like net promoter score. Are they going to promote me? That's good information, but it doesn't tell the whole story. So you really want to take this opportunity to get those pressing questions answered as you're evaluating survey usage. And again, take this opportunity to really get to know your customers and how they engage with you as a company. So you've determined that, yes, I need a survey. Second and third party data doesn't exist to answer my questions today. Definitely have to go and ask these questions. Now what, right? So overview of types of surveys. This is where you really start to determine what type of survey is going to fit your needs. So there's at the offset, really two kinds of surveys. There's your quantitative surveys and your qualitative surveys. Very different types of surveys. Qualitative surveys, you can do these online, can do these absolutely over the phone, or as I mentioned, focus groups in person, which obviously is not happening right now, or has in the last 12 months, because who wants to go sit in a room with full strangers in the middle of a pandemic, right? So this is that qualitative space really is going to be that much more one-on-one in-depth approach, but quantitative surveys really are going to give you the option to do a lot more with the data. Formats for a quantitative: telephone, mail, mostly online these days, online being the easiest form to kind of get in front of people, especially given the current challenges we're facing. So when do you use them, right? So quantitative, you're going to want to use these for things like market research, understanding what's going on in your industry and in your marketing space, things that are going to affect you as a company. Customer insights and profiling, right? So you're going to want to understand who your customers are, what's driving their decision making, what's driving their behaviors. And again, that goes both B2B and B2C. Decision makers at companies are people too, right? It's not just a company for those B2B folks out there. It's a person making decisions. You want to understand the people you're talking to there as well. Customer segmentation. This is a really good opportunity, kind of goes along with that customer insights piece, but really kind of being able to break down the different people who are engaging with you into unique segments. This is going to make personalization, which is a big topic in marketing right now, a lot easier to do while still being very relevant. Media planning, brand loyalty, net promoter score, guest satisfaction, customer satisfaction are all additional pieces of information to consider. Some of these things you're going to just immediately upon your research at the very beginning, determining if you need a survey, you really are going to see that a lot of this exists, especially in things like media planning, market research. There's a lot of data and companies that are out there that do this today and who are experts at it. So like I said before, definitely do your research to see what third-party partners exist to help provide additional data that you don't have before launching full force into a survey. And then once you have that, you say, okay, well, these are the key things we need to know. Qualitative, as mentioned, very in-depth, very heavily driven towards things like research and development, customer satisfaction, and really just kind of that feedback that you want from your current customers and potential marketplaces.
What you're changing, I just wanted to interject something really quickly. As a reminder, there is a chat pane at the bottom, and feel free to chat amongst send a chat to the panelists, or you can chat amongst the other participants that are in the group. And then also there's a Q&A window, and please submit questions as they come up. We'll address all of those questions at the end. We'll stick around until all the questions are answered. But please feel free to use that at any time. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Please ask questions. We'll be happy to answer anything that you have. Between Dr. Sarah and I will be answering questions at the very end. So anything that we don't cover, happy to cover at the end. So at the end of the day, with all these different questions and types of surveys as you're evaluating it, really taking a step back and taking a scientific approach to marketing data is very important. And that's kind of what we do here at AnalyticsIQ and our data creation is, how do we be scientific about this? But why we do that is because most people don't answer questions directly. So you could easily ask somebody like, do you like blue? And their response could be anything from, oh my gosh, I love blue, to, well, I like blue, but only in this very specific shade. So I'm going to say no, because I don't like all blues. I only like this type of blue, right? So you have to make sure when you're approaching surveys that you're doing it from a very inquisitive point of view, and you're phrasing questions that are going to get people thinking and also elicit a real response from them. So you want to be inquisitive. You want to make sure you're asking the right questions in the right way in order to get that real response and not kind of have a knee-jerk reaction or encourage people to maybe be slightly less than truthful with their answers. As we all know, people like to over or under exaggerate their own feelings. So be inquisitive, make sure you're posing questions in a way that makes sense and is also going to get the answer that you're actually looking for. Customize it, right? There's loads of surveys out there. You want to make sure that as you're developing these questions, especially as you're kind of looking at repurposing questions and repurposing surveys and options you've done in the past, for those of you who have done surveys, that you are updating it and making sure it's relevant to the current marketplace and you have the ability to customize the segments and the questions to fit your current needs. Be technical about it, right? So taking the scientific approach, it doesn't mean just asking the questions, getting them in, saying, cool, that looks wonderful. We got great responses. You want to make sure that your sample size is statistically significant. So 30 people does not really represent a marketplace. You want to make sure that you have enough respondents that are actually going to respond. You want to make sure you're validating your surveys and making sure your approach there really does make sense and is going to be statistically significant and is scientific enough to answer the questions and dive deep into the data where it's more than just a couple of people who've responded. And then, At the end of the day, surveys are wonderful, insights are fantastic. You need to be able to do something with this and have this in your overall marketing budget, not just be a pretty picture or profile, right? You want to get the responses to your surveys making growth-driven decisions and marketing decisions for your organizations. So with that said, and that introduction into the whole survey world, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Sarah Cavrak to kind of talk through how we approach surveys and utilize cognitive psychology in the creation of surveys.
Okay, well, thank you for all of that, Ariana, and thank you for kicking us off and for introducing me. I'm Dr. Sarah Cavrak. I'm the Director of Cognitive Sciences with AnalyticsIQ, and as Ariana said, I'm going to talk to you about my area or my field and how we utilize cognitive sciences in the development of our surveys and really the entirety of our research process. Okay, so to get started, it's really sort of the best way to get a handle on cognitive sciences is to understand both what it is and what it isn't. Cognitive sciences is a scientific discipline. In the same way as biology or chemistry or physics, cognitive sciences uses the experimental research process to understand psychological phenomena, any particular behavior we might be interested in, as well as personal or implicit features to ourselves. It is also a subdomain within the broader field of psychology. And usually in my experience, when people hear psychology, they instantly think therapeutics, they think clinical work, they think, talking about their childhood and emotional experiences, and that is part of psychology, but that is not cognitive sciences. Travis, if you want to go to the next slide. Thank you. Cognitive sciences is actually the study of mental thought process. It's the study of mental thought process. A helpful analogy for this is you have a car and you take it to a mechanic, and the mechanic lifts the hood to look at the engine. And this part is connected to this part, which spins this thing, which propels your car forward. Okay, that's how the engine works. In cognitive sciences, we're kind of doing the same thing. Not so much on the anatomical level like neuroscientists would. We're not necessarily talking about amygdala versus hippocampus versus frontal lobe, although we are interested in that, but we're not specifically looking at that. We're interested in the process by which people remember information, make certain decisions, acquire and utilize language, or experience their emotional lives, right? So how does an event happen that becomes a short-term memory? How does a short-term memory become a long-term memory? And then how, 10 years after the event, can someone say to you, hey, do you remember that time? And you go, oh yeah, you go back to your long-term memory, you pluck the memory out, you reconstruct it, and you share your experience from that thing. Is that what happens? Is that the mental thought process by which an event becomes a memory? How are people able to remember certain things that happened 20 years ago, but not things that happened last week? What's going on there? That's something a cognitive scientist might be interested in. Why do I buy organic produce versus regular produce? Why does one person vote for one candidate in an election and not somebody else? What's the decision process by which I reached one conclusion versus another? And is it different based on personal factors or features about me? And is it different based on the type of decision? These are all things a cognitive scientist might want to understand. And absolutely, there are individual differences all over the place based on age, gender, race, education, employment status, maybe a type of job, personality features, and something that we like to call cognitive processing ability, which, if I'm going to use the car example again, it's kind of like the strength of your engine. It's not your intelligence, right? And I'm not talking about intelligence here. I'm talking about horsepower. How strong is your mental engine? And there is a way to measure that, and everyone's is a little bit different. And it really matters for most of the things that we do on a daily basis. So these are all things we might want to look at within cognitive sciences. Why do we do this? Because we want to assess and predict. We want to assess and predict. We want to assess personality factors. We want to assess belief systems. We want to assess motivations in order to predict behavior. right? And if we can show that there's a pattern across people that are currently doing the thing we're interested in learning, then hopefully we can predict that behavior in other people that we don't have access to that look the same way. Yeah? All right, Travis, if you want to go to the next slide. Cool. Okay, so how do we do this? Cognitive sciences, just as with any scientific discipline, uses a top-down process. We start with a theory. Somebody else somewhere in the world who's in our field has studied the thing that we also want to understand. What did they find, right? They came up with some idea or construct about how things normally go for that topic, okay? We're interested in that topic, and so we access their theory, the theory of relativity, right? If I was a physicist, maybe. Then I decide what I want to understand about this theory. So maybe whatever the behavior is, I'm interested in gender differences. And I create a set of predictions for what I think men versus women are going to do on this behavior. So these predictions are called hypotheses. Okay, I have a theory. I develop what I want to understand about this theory, and I create a set of predictions called hypotheses. I create or I structure an experiment to assess this thing. So maybe I have people self-identify as male or female, and then I ask them how much they, I assess something like exercise, or how much they purchase, or how much they donate to a particular charity. And then based on my predictions, I calculate their scores and I compare them. Do men versus women donate money to certain organizations more than the other? Then that insight reinforms the original theory that I started out with. Yes, this theory exists, but it's different for these two groups of people. Or maybe it's not. Maybe I had a set of predictions and then my data does not support them. That's also an informative piece of information. Okay, that's the general scientific process. But when we're talking about research in the marketing world, we actually do something that's more bottom up. So we actually start at the product we want to build. Whether it's something that we internally want to build or whether it's something a client is coming to us and saying, we want to understand people that own pets. We want to solve for people that have dogs, and specifically people that have dogs that they purchase clothing for. Okay, so we know that the outcome is people that own dogs that buy sweaters for their dogs. Okay, that's the outcome in product. And then we go, okay, we know what we want to know, right? Now we have to decide how we're going to ask the question. Do you have a pet? What kind of pet? How many? Maybe how old are they? What kind of breed are they? And certainly in the last 12 months, have you purchased any clothing for your pet, for your dog? Okay. So what we want to know is the beginning point. Then that determines or helps inform the format and style of the questions we ask on the survey. Then of course we craft the survey, gather the data, and then gain insights into some concept, which then helps us create predictive data points. Now, in my department at AnalyticsIQ, we actually combine these processes together. So we start with the outcome or the product. What does the client want to know, or what do we want to build? And then depending on what that thing is, I circle all the way to the top and I go, has anyone else looked at this? Has anyone else studied this phenomena? Do we know anything about the science of charitable giving? Okay, it's one example. Yes, we do. Okay, what have other researchers found about charitable giving or pro-social behavior? That informs the format and style of the questions we ask. Maybe I or you don't have to reinvent the wheel and come up with our own questions. Maybe somebody else has already done this, found that it works and that it's valid, and we can just use those questions, tweak them a little bit based on our purposes, and then just use those on our survey. Okay. Then we come up with a set of hypotheses about what we think is going to happen. Maybe we're also assessing motivation style as well as amount of donation, right? And so that informs our predictions, the hypotheses we're creating. And then we add the questions to the survey, we create the whole thing, we program it, we launch it, and then eventually we analyze the data and gain our insights. So you see how these two processes work together. Next slide. All right. This is a little bit of a repeat of some things that Ariana said, but I'm going to go over it again. This is a layered process. It doesn't have to be as complicated as maybe all of that sounded, and hopefully it didn't sound too complicated. But why would you even want to attempt to go through this process? To learn something. You want to learn something about your current or potentially future customer. Learn about their motivations, their behaviors, what's going on inside the home. Did they just lose their job? Are there kids in the home? Like, there's lots of things you might want to understand, which hopefully helps you deepen your relationship with them. in deepening your relationship with them. Hopefully that leads to both longevity and loyalty, if that's what you're going for. But if you're growing your business, I imagine that it is something you're going for. Additionally, and this is by no means an exhaustive slide or an exhaustive list, but you also gain insights into the life cycle of your product or service. Is there a specific thing that's usually happening with people when they purchase your product or service? If you know what that is, then you know how to talk to them. Is there a significant event that leads to them exiting your product or service? And is that the natural life cycle? Or maybe there's no end to the life cycle and you can continue to nurture that relationship on and on and on. These are really powerful things to learn if you're wanting to keep customers, keep the loyalty, and ultimately continue to grow. All right, next slide. Cool. All right, so I kind of gave you the umbrella, and now I'm going to give you like boots on the ground. How do you do this? And from the poll that we had, maybe 20 minutes ago, a lot of y'all have already done surveys, and obviously I don't know in what capacity, whether you've done like an Instagram poll or whether you've done a SurveyMonkey and launched it to your newsletter list. Obviously I don't know that. So if any of this feels like repeat, my apologies to you, but hearing things multiple times helps reify it in our own minds. But yeah, to reiterate what Ariana said, what do you want to know? There's already things you know about your current clients or your ideal client avatar. What do you not know that you want to know, right? So identify that first. And then you want to make it really specific. We would call this operationalization. How are you going to operationalize the thing you want to know? You want to understand how healthy someone is. Gosh, so many ways to ask that question. But maybe the first thing you want to know, is about exercise. All right, well, how are you going to operationalize that? Do you exercise? Is it a frequency? How often do you exercise? Is it type of exercise? Is it intensity? Maybe it's all of it. Operationalize what the thing is you want to understand. You might want to create a specific research question. Okay, so let's say we're interested in people that take health risks. Okay, that's the thing we want to know. I want to know about people that take health risks. What do I specifically want to understand? Let's say right now, because we're in a pandemic, we specifically want to understand people that take COVID health risks, people that are not interested in adhering to COVID safe protocols. Mask wearing, forget it. Washing hands, not worried. Social distancing, that's your problem. Okay, maybe that's something we want to understand. What's our research question? Is it a profile issue? Who is doing this more than another? Why are they doing this? What's motivating them to not engage with these safety protocols? Then determine what outcomes, actions, and insights you want to attain. Is it really just about identifying them? Or is it about understanding the motivations, why they do this, so that you can speak to them and encourage them in a way that shows that you're listening and know what their experience is? And then you're going to write your questions, analyze your data, and hopefully validate them, which means you're going to do this a few times, right? Okay, so from the bottom up, what do you want to know? Operationalize how you're going to ask the question. Formulate a research question. Decide what it is you want to ultimately figure out from your survey sample, and then you'll gather your data. Two other pieces to keep in mind here. Again, this is kind of a repeat of something Ariana said, but I'll say it again. Representation is important. Who's your sample? If you're just interested in women that do yoga, then you might not want to send an email blast to everyone on your newsletter list or on your everyone in your account, or everyone that's ever purchased a product or service, because that's not your target sample, right? Get specific about exactly who you want insights from so that you can target them. And then of course, frequency. Is this one specific time frame or behavior you're interested in? Are you interested in their health journey? And maybe like every January, you send them the same survey over and over again, year after year, to learn how their health journey is changing. Maybe it's after a particular event, right? Like maybe you send a survey email at like 3 days after they purchase something, right? Is there a timing involved here? Just some things to consider as you're building out your survey process. Or if you end up working with someone that helps you do this, things to keep in mind as you're crafting or building this relationship with someone that might help you do this research. All right, next slide, please. Great. Again, something Ariana touched on that I'm going to go into a little bit more detail with is the type of survey questions. So now you know the research process, top down, bottom up, and they meet in the middle. What's your question? How are you operationalizing it? And then what are you asking? You could ask a single question and get a single insight or a single score. So something like, do you have health insurance? Yes or no? How do you identify male, female, or other? And you put yourself in a category, right? How often do you exercise? Never to daily on a 7-point Likert scale, right? Single question, single insight. Second, multiple questions, single insight or single score. So let's use this health example again. Let's say you're interested in identifying healthy people. So many ways to ask this. Let's say that you decide out of all the ways you could ask this question, right? Stress levels, how much they're sleeping, what their diet is, how much they exercise. Let's say that you decide to focus on like consumptive habits, like food, etc. So how much they're eating fresh vegetables, how much they're eating junk food or fried food, the frequency of alcohol consumption if they're smoking cigarettes, and then, I don't know, caffeine intake, let's say. And so you decide to ask all those questions, each one of those on a Likert scale. How frequently do you do this thing? And then you're going to roll all those up into one score. Maybe it's a sum, maybe it's an average, maybe it's a weighted mean. And then once you have a single score from all those questions combined together, then maybe you want to look at just the healthiest people, right? Like that's who your target market is the healthiest people. So maybe you take the top 5% of that score range, and that's your target. Okay, that's one way you could ask a question or a set of questions. Number 3, you could build a single question and get multiple scores. And this is more of a categorization thing. So what types of insurance do you currently have? And then they would pick the buttons, right? I have health insurance, I have homeowners, I have auto, I have accidental, right? Or maybe you say, what kinds of insurance don't you have? And then you know which message you want to give to people, right? Or, you know, another silly example is like, what's your favorite ice cream flavor, right? And then you give people options. Of course, you don't want to ask questions that aren't going to actually give you insights, but you see where we're going here. One simple question to get multiple insights or scores. And the final one is actually a slightly bit more complicated, and is what's ultimately going to lead you to something called a segmentation system, which you might be familiar with. You probably would not be doing this on your own. You would almost definitely want to work with someone to do this. But basically, you would ask multiple questions in order to get multiple scores or multiple categorizations of people. So if we want to use that health example again, let's say you're interested in both dietary habits and exercise habits. And so you'd ask all the questions. And then based on all the questions, maybe you'd come up with like 4 to 6 segmentation, a segmentation system of 4 to 6 groups that are a combination of diet and exercise. And then you would name each of those groups and look at the consistencies or differences across them. Okay, next slide. All right. So you know the research process. You know that there's multiple ways to ask any one thing, but then how are you actually going to write the question? Well, one is you could hire someone to write them for you. If you want to undertake this on your own, here's a couple keys to writing good questions. First, and always, keep your eye on the prize. Get clear on your objective and stay on your objective. Once you start writing questions, it's super easy to go down a rabbit hole. I do it often. And I have to go, wait, what am I trying to understand here? Pull it back, right? Because you start writing one question and you're like, well, it might be nice to know this. It might be nice to know this. What about that? And all of a sudden you've strayed off topic. So get clear and stay clear so that you can keep it simple. Number 2, you definitely want to keep your questions simple. Don't add a lot of qualifiers. Get to the point. Ask what you want to know. And a general rule that's pretty consistent across research, whether you're in academia or in marketing, keep your questions at an 8th grade level. Okay, and Microsoft Word makes this really easy to do. You just highlight, and then there's a button that says like, I forget what it is, like test my, what level is this at? What grade level? Makes it really easy. And because the reality is like, maybe you know that your audience is like maybe more highly educated, but maybe not everyone is, and everyone needs to get the same question. So this is just a rule that is pretty consistent across the board in research. And you want to keep your entire survey pretty short, right? Attention spans are short, so you want to be as brief as possible. Now, for the research that we do at AnalyticsIQ, we work with a panel company. And so people sign up to earn money or points through the panel company to take surveys. So those folks already kind of know what they're getting into. So our surveys are 10 minutes or under. But if you're not going to use a panel company and you're just going to do this on your own, I'd highly recommend you keep it under 5 minutes. Otherwise, you're going to get attrition. And I don't know if you've purchased something recently and you've received that 3 days later survey that says, hey, how did you like that jacket Or what did you think? And then you click the survey and you're like, yeah, sure, I'll give you some feedback. And then all of a sudden you're 3 pages in and you're like, I didn't sign up for this, right? Close the window, move on with life. So you want to keep it short. The other thing that I forgot to put on this screen is that you definitely want to incentivize people. That's definitely going to increase your response rate. So many ways to incentivize people, right? Percentage off their next purchase, enter to win a gift card, we'll donate $5 to the philanthropic charity of your choice. Like pick whatever works for you and your brand, but definitely incentivize people. And then don't go it alone. Oh my gosh, science does not happen in a vacuum. Any published scientific work had at least 10 set of eyes on it, picking it apart, pulling it apart, and telling you what's wrong with it, okay? In order to get good, sound scientific results, because every single person on this call and in life is biased in some way. And I don't mean bias means bad. It just means we have a certain way that we look at the world. And you need multiple perspectives of people going, hey, this is really good, but you didn't think about this. Or you might want to also consider this. Have at least one research buddy that can help you, right? They can help you talk through what you want to understand, how you want to do this, and maybe even a third person to be the survey taker who knows nothing about your objective. I cannot tell you how many times I craft a survey. It's good. From a scientific perspective, the questions are solid, the answer options are solid. But then I go to take it as the survey taker, and then I go, oh, well, as the survey taker, I wouldn't answer the question that way. And I realize my response options are all wrong. But as the scientist, it makes sense. As the survey taker, it doesn't work. And so I have to go back and revise. Have a second or third set of eyes helping you out. All right, so get clear and stay clear. Keep it simple. Keep it short. Incentivize people and have a buddy. All right, so we're going to take this and put this in action. And so I'm going to walk you through these questions one at a time. So I want you to open up a fresh Word document or a fresh piece of notebook paper. And for those of you that have already done surveys, maybe this just helps you take it to the next step. And for those of you that never have done this before, yeah, this will be brand new. So get your fresh document or your fresh piece of paper. And we're going to take maybe 30 seconds per item or 20 seconds per item. And I want you to write down something that you already know about your current customer or current ideal client avatar. And if you have multiple, just pick one for the sake of this example or this practice. So just write down something you already know about them. And it can totally be just demographic. For this exercise, keep it simple. All right, so you already know something about them. What is something you don't know that you'd like to know about them? Try to get as specific as possible here. What is something you do not know now that you would really like to know? All right. And then I want you to identify one measurable either behavior, or if you're going around the motivational belief route, what is at least one measurable thing that you could ask about that answers the former question, right? What is one thing you can ask about that gives you information on a thing you want to know about them? You want to know how healthy they are, so you want to ask about exercise habits. All right, so now that you have the behavior or perhaps the belief system or motivation, how would you ask the question? How would it actually look on a survey? Do you exercise? How frequently? What types? Again, depending on whatever it is you want to know. How would you actually ask the question? And then what would your response options be? Would it be a dichotomous yes, no? Are you talking about a Likert scale, right? How much do you like this? How satisfied are you with my services? How frequently do you do? Or maybe it's a categorization. And then who's going to take your survey? What's your target population here? Also, you can put question marks for any of these if you're like, I really don't know, feeling very uncomfortable with this whole thing. Or maybe you just need to come back later and think about it more. Totally fine. But who's your target population? And then what's your pathway to administer this survey? Is it going to be an email blast? Are you going to work with a vendor? Are you going to put up a social media poll? Do you really want that qualitative information and you're going to call them? And then finally, think about frequency. Is this a one-time survey? Is it associated with a particular event or a purchase? Are you going to do this in regular intervals? And any of these answers, of course, will change, and they'll also change depending on the number of things you want to ask about. But if this is the route you want to go, this is essentially the process of how to craft the right question, get the wording the way that you really want to be able to, the way that you want it, so that you can operationalize and get reliable results. All right, that's the end of my portion of the presentation. I'm going to turn it back over to Ariana. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Sarah. And just kind of to tack on to Sarah's portion there, if as you're kind of going through that exercise you just put us through, you're having questions, or you're this is something your company is seriously considering, and you would like some help in this area, AnalyticsIQ is more than happy to act as a partner, act as a consultant, to kind of walk you through approach in these different areas. So please do not hesitate to reach out. But moving on, real life use cases, and this is kind of a combination of how we do this both for ourselves as well as for our clients, and how we utilize surveys to create unique data. So the first area, I tried to choose a few relevant insights and pieces of information. I know we've got a variety of different insurance partners on the line here, so I try to choose a few that kind of run the different gamuts across behaviors. So this first one is our auto IQ data. Here we really wanted to move beyond. There's a lot of data out there, like what makes and models people buy, what types of cars people buy. Wanted to move beyond it. So yes, we do want to measure types of vehicles, but we want to understand what drove people to make those purchases. So really kind of understanding, right, are they buying something because they want it to be eco-friendly? Are they looking for safety purchases? Are they looking for things like price-driven or status-driven? So we utilize cognitive psychology in our survey process to go beyond just the standard data that exists and dive into each of those different behaviors from a automotive perspective to really what drives those behaviors. Motivator IQ. So we've talked a lot about motivations and behaviors today. We've talked a little bit about it from a risk-taking perspective, right? So this is something that's so inherent to people's behaviors, right? It's how they live their lives. And it's oftentimes not something that people necessarily understand about themselves, right? So this is where the cognitive psychology really comes into play. Is someone an extrovert? Are they impulsive? How are they making those decisions? Are they taking risks, but not really thinking that they're risk-taking? Back to that lovely COVID risk-taking. Are they wearing masks? Are they washing their hands regularly? Are they social distancing, right? Those risk-taking behaviors from a COVID perspective, or even just in their day-to-day lives. Are the activities that they do, the entertainment that they seek, are these risky behaviors financially? Are they risk takers? Or are they very conservative financially, right? So there's all sorts of different ways that you can measure these different areas, which really heavily rely on understanding how people's minds work and what's going to drive that decision-making process. And then one area that I know, again, we have such a gamut of B2B and B2C people on this call, is our business core data. So Again, that my point earlier, moving beyond the demographic and firmographic side of things, people make decisions at companies. So we also want to know what those decision-making processes are on an individual level at these organizations, right? So understanding how people want to be contacted, when they want to be contacted, what type of information is going to be relevant to them, delivering those messages that are going to resonate. So understanding all these pieces of information and going beyond that firmographic and business essential side of things and really diving deep into the individuals at organizations who are making the decisions that you need to and want to connect with. So for a case study, so those are some areas where we have utilized cognitive psychology and surveys to fill out our own data sets to provide those type of insights for our partners. Again, did it for ourselves because that is our goal, right? Providing those unique insights for our partners. But what happens on the custom side of things? So we talked a little bit about some of the work we've done in utilizing surveys for our nonprofit partners, but here's one specific to a nonprofit partner that actually saw some major donor acquisition reduction, cost reduction. So some major results here based on our survey capabilities. So what we started with was a survey. We had a nonprofit partner who wanted to better connect with current and new donors. They wanted to do it through social media and really make an impact on both current donors as well as new donors, really try to drive up those donations and reduce donor acquisition. So what we did is we took the hundreds of thousands of data points that we have, utilizing audience segments. We utilize our survey process and our cognitive psychology process to identify the unique behaviors and motivations of the individuals in our file, and then appended those to our customer file, to our client's customer file, to identify the unique audience segments that make up their prospect list as well as their current customer list, finding the people who have a high propensity to respond to messaging across social media, and also have a high propensity to donate. From there, we were able to actually help them launch the campaign. They were able to target individuals who had that high propensity to respond to social media and high propensity to actually donate to a cause. And then their cost per acquisition for a new donor went from $240 per donor to $70 per donor. So not only is that a massive reduction, it's a 71% reduction in cost for new donor acquisition, it also increased 25% boost in engagement. So just kind of an example of starting from the beginning, asking the right questions, identifying those motivations, and what does that survey and those insights that you're going to utilize for those surveys play into your larger marketing strategy? Is it acquisition of new customers? Where do you want to reach those customers? And what is it about those customers that are going to make them want to engage with you? And making sure you're understanding those motivations and behaviors and lifestyles of the individuals that you're trying to engage with, and engaging with them in a location, right time, right place, that they're actually going to respond to your messaging. So survey really does go across the board. And this is a real example of how that survey process was able to feed into the data that we have to answer a question and deliver real results for one of our partners. So that's it from us. Jim? I think you might be on mute.
You would think, as often as I spend my days on Zoom, I would not have muted myself. Yeah, just a reminder, want to remind you about the upcoming conference. Please check that out on the IMCA website. Likewise, next month on March 25th, Chris Thierry will be with us, and she'll be talking about personal branding, brand you, building your personal leadership brand. And then finally, the submission deadline is March 31st, but for you overachievers, early bird discounts are still out there until March the 1st for the IMCA Showcase Awards, the largest insurance-specific award category in the world, matter of fact. All right, so some questions. One of them, and I'll let you guys, you may not know off the top of your head, I'll let you go ahead and look it up. but there's a question on in Word how you do the readability checking. You know, that what grade level that checking is on there. I believe it's in the tools menu under grammar into the advanced options. But if one of you have an answer specific to that, that would be great.
I would also have to remind myself of exactly where it is, but I know that it's in there, and it's probably type your question in the search box and it'll direct you exactly where it is. I've used it. I know it's there. I'm sorry. I don't have Word open right now, and I don't know the pathway to get you there, but it exists. I promise.
Okay, so first question, how do you know that the survey data you have collected is accurate or reliable? Good question.
Very good question.
Ariana, would you like me to take that, or would you like to jump in?
Yeah, you're the one with the PhD. This is your expertise. Please take that one, Sarah.
Okay, yeah, great. Good question. There's a couple ways. Number one, you look at past research. Are the results you found consistent with past research? Hopefully, if you're functioning on the same operating theory, there will be consistencies across data sets. If you're finding that there's a difference, then it's not, what your result is not consistent or reliable with the previous. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It could be human error, or it could be you found something nuanced. And so in that case, what you'd want to do is run it again. Run it a second time. If you get the exact same result a second time, at least that result is reliable, and maybe you've hit on something unique that the previous research you're looking at didn't address. Okay, so it's basically it's like a rinse and repeat. You do it again. You do it again. Did you get the same result? Great. If you didn't, there's a problem, right? Recheck your measures, recheck your analyses. Who had their hands on the data? Did somebody delete a column and they shouldn't have deleted it? Human error in data processing happens all the time, which goes back to my point about don't go it alone. Have somebody else helping you, because you could make a mistake that somebody else can catch for you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. What is the minimum recommended panel size for an effective survey?
Also a great question, and it definitely varies. When we were at the infancy stage of our survey research, we were getting quarterly surveys, and I think we were fielding about 3,000 people. But now we're up to 12,000. Like, we get bi-monthly surveys and we get 12,000 each. But our intentions are very likely different from, like, for the work that we're doing, trying to do predictive data points, it's probably going to be different than you trying to just gain insights onto your own business. And so, again, it really depends on your population and the insights that you are aiming for. Get as much data as you can. if you get 12 data points, if you get 12 people to respond, it's not that you can't gain insights from that. It might not be statistically significant, but you wouldn't know unless you run the analyses. 100 people's great, 250, 300 is like, if there is like an ideal minimum, 300 people. If you want an actual number, I would say 300 is great. It's a good starting point, but get as much as you can. But just if
it's 300 return surveys, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
that would be great. Okay. But honestly, you get 20, you can totally still use that information. It's just not as good as 300.
Yeah, and I would just tack on, like, it really depends on what the goal of the survey is, right? If you're talking a general market survey and you want to understand how a group of people behaves within the overall marketplace and the overall US, right? You want to have a very statistically significant representative panel. So that 2,000 to 3,000 is probably necessary, right? Because you're going to be running statistical analyses. If you're trying to gain insights to current customers or a subset of current customers, that's where that kind of like several hundred could be much more indicative. So it really just depends on what what you're representing, who your customers are, who your respondents are going to be, and what you're trying to do with that data.
Okay, great. What kind of impact have you seen clients leverage based on the data? And I know this is a broad question, but can you give some examples, and particularly those that might be closer to insurance or financial services?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's very interesting. It's a very interesting question. For the most part, we're seeing customer acquisition costs go down because data that is being utilized, that we're creating on their behalf, through different surveys is actually impacting their media spend and their media decisions, getting very targeted. We're seeing more specific messaging go out the door. You know, it really does kind of vary, and again, back to what each customer's decisions are and what their motivations and are in terms of, you know, different marketing initiatives. We are seeing, you know, much more predictive insights and cost per acquisition, marketing efficiencies come out of the usage of surveys and data.
Great, great. I said I'd stick with the questions until we got through all of them. We're right at the top, we're at the full hour right now, but we're just going to finish up these last couple of questions. We appreciate everybody for being here today. Can you speak to a Likert scale? We've seen them, you know, 1 to 5, 1 to 7, 1 to 10. What's the magic number when you look at the different types of scales?
So it depends on whether you want to give people a fence to sit on or whether you want to push them to one side or the other. And whether it's a 5, 7, or 10, like in terms of the increments, like I would do more than 3. 5 is completely acceptable. The standard and original Likert scale, like the name Likert comes from a 7-point scale, but none of them are wrong, and they will all get you information. Like the NPS is a 10-point scale, totally valid scale, and yet others are 5 and 7. Like, so it just depends on, like, are you okay with people sitting in the middle, or do you really want to push people to a side? And then in that case, you might want to go even odd, right? If you want to go a 6-point or a 10-point versus a 5 or a 7. But anything less than 5 might not give you the granularity you want. But I wouldn't go any less than 5 and then decide about the fence sitting bit.
Okay, great.
It's a judgment call.
And one last question, and we'll wrap here. If my company wanted to conduct our own survey, where should we start, and what should we expect in terms of a budget? The budget question. I know that's a tough
budget
one,
question.
Right?
Everybody's favorite question. No, it's a very good question, right? So I would say, again, if you're surveying your own mailing list, your current customers, people you're engaging with, utilizing something like SurveyMonkey is incredibly cheap or even free. It's a wonderful tool that exists. And it depends, again, on what it is you're trying to accomplish for. If you're talking about, you know, a true custom survey where you're trying to go out and ask questions of the general marketplace, having worked on custom surveys and in custom research, in market research, and then now, you know, working with clients here at AnalyticsIQ, the lower end in terms of any sort of custom research or custom surveys, when you're, you know, looking at a panel, you're really talking around 25,000 minimum starting, and then from there it goes up. It just depends on what it is you want to accomplish, what it is you want with the data, length of the survey, number of respondents, and then what the end usage of the data is. So I would say expect for custom surveys to start at the 25,000 mark, especially for ones that are not surveys of your current customers.
Okay, great. Great.
Hopefully
Excellent.
That's helpful. It's a little vague,
no,
but
I think it gave us some guardrails to take a look at.
Yes. And please reach
Awesome.
out, you know, again, if you have questions after this, by all means, you know, we're here to guide in any way and help in any way we can.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate your insights today. This has been great. And Travis is in the background. He's been driving the deck. Appreciate that. And Quincy at IMCA headquarters, thank you for keeping the wheels on the wagon and keep us moving along. We'll see you back here on March 25th. Personal brand, Christine Thierry. I guarantee a dynamic presentation. Thanks again and have a wonderful day.